Tonight's presentation is one of a series of lectures on the founding families of St. Helena. And our guest speaker is Miss Lois Day. The title of her talk is The Chaix Family History in Napa Valley. Lois's grandfather, Jean-Victor Chaix, an immigrant from France, was the first commercial vineyardist on Howell Mountain and was influential in the early days of the wine industry in the St. Helena area. Lois grew up on the peninsula and since early childhood has made trips to St. Helena, first with her parents and later with her husband. As it happens with many of us, these trips from the peninsula or the city up to the wine country become more frequent and they're longer and longer, and finally we all move here. So that's exactly what happened to Lois, and she's been living here for 7 years? Yes. So Lois stays busy these days with church activities and researching French wine and also her family history that she's going to share with us tonight. So welcome, Lois. We're so happy you're going to bring history to life for us again tonight.
Thank you. Well, the other thing, I keep busy drinking the wine also, so that, why not? Okay. Well, first of all, thank you for allowing me to come here and tell about my family, of which I'm very proud. Before I start, I want to add a claimer, not a disclaimer, but a claimer. My family has always pronounced C-H-A-I-X as Chaix. However, the family of my grandfather's brother, Adrian, sometimes spelled with an A and sometimes with an E, pronounce it Chaix or Chaix. So if you've grown up here, you know something other than Chaix. And however, I am sure there are many ways to spell it. Most logically would be Chaix, but it's Chaix. And so that's all I'm going to be saying tonight because that's all I've ever known. That's just introduction to the fact that it started out in Oakville. But now to the history of my father, Jean-Victor Chaix, his brother Adrien Pierre Chaix, and Jean Chaix's business partner, Jean Adolphe Brun. Not a John's in the house. And all Frenchmen who left their native land to make history in Napa Valley. The Chaix brothers were from Provence, France, more specifically a small town, Treschâtel, near Gap in the Haute Alps. And the Tour of France goes there every July, through that general area, so I'm glued to it trying to see what the territory is. My grandfather, Jean, was born in 1851 and was a horticulturist who decided at the age of 23 to set off for California, specifically Napa Valley, after hearing about the soil and possibilities of winemaking in the area. Upon arriving in 1874, he took a job in Yountville working at Gottlieb Grossinger's cellars, what's now vintage 1870. Which was said to be one of the most prosperous winemaking plants of the country at the time. There, he became close friends with a fellow worker, Jean Adolphe Brun. In 1877, the two formed a partnership, A. Brun and Company. Jean Brun, also known as Adolphe, mainly I'm sure because of the confusion of the same first names, was 32 and had winemaking experience, while Jean Chaix, then 26, had experience growing grapes, making for an ideal blending of skills and resources. They started with a tiny cellar, 20 feet by 34 feet in Oakville. They called it Nouveau Madoc, which was the 9th bonded winery in the state of California. It started out as a small facility making wine for using purchased grapes, but grew it as they increased their wine production and would later include grapes that were crushed on their second winery on Howell Mountain. You probably have seen this and maybe not paid any attention to what was on there, but it does say Bonded Winery, number 9, and it is now the Napa Wine Company. And it was called, the winery was called Nouveau Madoc with the label, there we go, but that was the label that they had on the wine. and then they also made a Chablis. Over the next 3 years, they continued to use purchased grapes only, expanded the cellar to 100 by 34 feet, 160 by 34 feet, with another 40 to 45 foot building nearby. They built a railroad siding of narrow gauge with a push car to connect to the railroad, added new tanks, had a private railroad, and were running 3 crushers. Production expanded from 10,000 gallons in 1877 to 115 gallons in 1880. And you'll see this again, but this was basically what Oakville was like at the time. And I'll explain a little bit more when we pull it again. And there's also a copy on the table over there if you want to pick it up and look at it closely. My grandfather believed that red grape varietals would do well at the 1,400-foot altitude or 16 or 18 altitude, depending upon where you were, where they were planted. So in 1880, Brun and Chaix bought a quarter section of land, 160 acres, from W.C. Watson on Howell Mountain, and started clearing the land to plant a vineyard on the eastern slope with clippings from 9 varietals imported from Madoc region of Bordeaux in France, known for its red varietals. A severe frost in 1882 killed grapes on the valley floor, but not those on Howell Mountain, proving that Jean Chaix knew what he was doing. The vines like the soil, hillside gravel, and intense sunshine. My grandfather was the pioneer vineyardist and the first commercial vineyardist on Howell Mountain. In 1885, there were 191 acres, with 100 acres in vines. After the vineyard planting started on Howell Mountain, the partners realized that they needed to communicate with each other more easily than riding horseback or buckboard back and forth from Howell Mountain down to Oakville. So they constructed a 50-foot-high water tank so they could send signals back and forth using signals with aid of telescopes. There was a direct line, and how it could, how they figured out, I'm sure they did, but obviously, but the direct line between Oakville and the Howell Mountain. My question is, assuming that they used the Morse code that Samuel F.B. Morse invented in 1838, did they signal in French? And I find there was a lot of correspondence in French that I have found in the family archives in our house. One writer speculated that signaling didn't work well. Had cell phones been used then, they probably wouldn't have worked well either, because they still don't have good communication off Howell Mountain. So it's just like. Also in 1881, the St. Helena Star, in St. Helena Star reported that the junior partner, Jean Chaix, of Brun and Chaix at Oakville, will open a branch establishment in Sacramento. They had leased a cellar at the Routier station in Sacramento County, where the same varietal of grapes were purchased for $5 to $10 less than in Napa Valley. Production in Oakville that year was reported at 50,000 gallons, with 10,000 gallons produced in Sacramento. Okay. In 1886, Nouveau Madoc Winery, there's Nouveau Madoc, Brun and Chaix, and A. Brun, so they're all interchangeable, the same people. In 1886, the Nouveau Madoc Winery built a whole new winery on Howell Mountain, and it became known as the Brun and Chaix Winery, as opposed to Nouveau Madoc. And this was the 13th bonded winery in California. So they had 2. And that says Howell Mountain, because that was but early in the construction. But the new 60 by 60-foot cellar had, and has still, because it's there, walls 30 inches thick, built from rock formed from Howell Mountain Quarry, cut by Italian mason contractor Frank Juni, familiar name in town, and assembled by Chinese labor. The lower level, the lower level is 2 floors underground on the south side, 1 floor underground on the east and west side, providing a cellar temperature of 60 degrees Fahrenheit. Along with the temperature being consistent, all I remember was a story that of my grandmother sending a couple of her sons into the winery for something, whatever it was, and they didn't come back out. Well, it turned out they were overcome by the fumes, and the temperature changed from outside and passed out. So, as I was saying, the winery used and uses gravity flow for grapes. Gravity flow, grapes delivered on the top floor with the crushing done on the next level down and juice flowing down the tanks on the lowest level for aging. The barrels of aged wine were put on buckboard and taken down Oakville for blending and bottling. I know for sure that on one trip down the mountain with my Uncle John along for the ride, the horse spooked and caused the buckboard to overturn. My uncle was injured and walked with a limp the rest of his life. And as I remember my uncle telling me the story, the driver was killed in the accident. But think of going down the Howell Mountain Road, from Howell Mountain down, I mean, you don't even want to drive it in a car now. At this point, the 2 partners had divided up the responsibility. Jean Chaix managed Howell Mountain, Jean Brun managed Oakville, and Brun also took on the task as wine salesman. In 1887, a fire raged in Brun and Chaix on Howell Mountain, but did no damage. The moral is, fires are not new to this area. By this time, the company's sales continued to grow, reaching New York, New Jersey, and New Orleans, especially Antoine's restaurant. New Orleans proved a good market for dry wines, particularly claret, liked by all the Frenchmen that lived in New Orleans. And this prompted the firm to establish an agency in New Orleans. The article Brun and Chaix, the Enterprising Wine Dealers of Oakville, published in December 19, 1890, reported that they also shipped to the Sandwich Islands, Japan, Central America, and many other cities in the United States, and claimed to do more business than any other firm in Napa County. What makes their business so successful is the fact that they personally superintend every department and are thoroughly practical. Obviously, their granddaughter didn't turn out. Anyway, they are both affable and hospitable gentlemen, and it is a pleasure to transact business with them. They have had a hard struggle, but mastered the situation and are now well on the road to success and prosperity. Brun and Chaix wines also won awards. San Francisco Merchants Institute, 1887, Napa County Fair, 1888, Paris World's Exhibition, 1889, the first time American wines were allowed to compete. And we, taking possessor here, got a bronze medal. Lake Michigan, and the last one was listed, is Lake Michigan Exhibition in 1893. You won't believe what I found in my drawer the other day. There's a little notebook over there, and on the cover is the advertising the Paris exhibition of 1889. I mean, why did it get in my drawer, and why did I open it? I don't know. In 1890, Brun and Chaix grew Zinfandel, Riesling, Mastaro, Sauvignon Vert, and Burgundy on its, by then, 115 acres. Cooperage was 300,000 gallons on Howell Mountain, and at Oakville, 150 gallons. Okay, this same barrel is also over there, but it was part of what they used when they had wine tastings and at exhibitions. I only knew it in these pieces of something in a box all my life. And when we came up here, Michael Johnson, who was a woodworker in Calistoga, restored it for us, and he had to put them all together like a master jigsaw puzzle, and then put the metal straps around. Okay, now for the personal side of Jean Victor Chaix. My grandfather, designated as an alien because he came from France, not another world, I guess, became a citizen of the United States in May 19th, 1884, and I just love the writing on this whole script. And I've also learned that any documents, I don't know that this is the case, but most documents have some error in it. So if you ever have a death certificate, when you get your death certificate, check it, because there's some... Okay, 6 months later, and 10 years after he arrived in Northern California, Jean Victor Chaix married Adele Marie Saint-Cyprien in San Francisco on November 19th, 1884. The groom was 36, the bride was 20. So, well, wait, yeah, well, you can see them. On Monday, December 8th, 1884, the issue of the St. Helena Star reported, Mr. Jean Chaix, from the firm of Brun and Chaix, Oakville, has been taking unto himself a bride and came up from San Francisco last Monday evening with a blushing captor of his heart. Their arrival in Oakville was an occasion of the gathering of a host of the groom's friends who celebrated the happy event in a pleasant party, as opposed to unpleasant. Mr. and Mrs. Chaix will reside on the firm's Howell Mountain Vineyard. The Star congratulates. Can you imagine reporting now? The newlyweds lived on Jean Chaix's estate, which was actually a neat cottage in well-groomed vineyards on Howell Mountain, on the property. And I think that same house was there when we'd come up during the winery's abandoned years, because it was still a low white house, and I'm sure it was still there. In the early 1890s, my grandparents built a home in Oakville on Highway 29 across from the winery. And that house is still there today. And this is the house, right, the picture that we have after it was built. I think most of their 9 children were born there. And I know that 3 of them went to Oakville, at least the older ones went to the Oakville school. And right behind the sign, what the white on top of the dress is the oldest, my Aunt Elise, and then Adolphe and my Uncle John. So there's 3 together right there. Behind the signs. Yeah, there's just one fellow on the right and then the other 3 next to him. There were 3, family picture? Oh, yeah, I love that picture. There were 3 girls and 6 boys, and the family loved to say that each sister had 6 brothers, which is fine until you think about really what they're saying. But my mother, the baby of the family, was only 9 months old when her father died. So I only know my grandparents through the stories told by my aunt, uncles, and others in the Brun family, and from the newspaper accounts and comments about him being kind and honorable. As an only child, I can't comprehend what it would be like to have 9 children, even being one of 9 children, especially with 6 boys. And when they were living in San Francisco, Lara Baru Bakery would deliver 6 loaves of long loaves of French bread every day. And the boys would come home from school, the bread was gone. My grandmother had to be a saint. And I know that family members, but I know all the family members that my uncles and my aunt, were all kind, gentle, and very thoughtful. The Oakville home was later used as offices for Oakville Vineyards, and today is a private residence. And it's beautiful. That picture is only about 2 or 3 weeks old, because I went past it to take a picture.
Is that across the highway?
It's across the highway, yeah. It's behind the hedges, and you can't really see. It used to be you could see it. You might want to ring the doorbell and campaign there so you can take it. Maybe I'll go with you, we can see. Okay. John, this is John Adolphe Brun. He was married to Emma Mermot, I'm not sure how you pronounce it, in San Francisco in 1880, and they built their home on the backside of the Nouveau Madoc Winery in Oakville. Unfortunately, he died in 1894 at 49 after a long battle with liver disease, and leaving his widow with 6 children. Following his death, Mrs. Brun and my grandfather incorporated Brun Chaix Company with Jean Chaix managing it. Okay, what I was going to show you, the Brun home is up to the top on the right-hand side. Up here. And the Chaix home was there. So they were on the same area. And then the winery bought the saloon that's down there too at one point and spread out to that. It was actually the drawing was made by a memory of made from memory by someone who had worked there, and he drew this. And the Brun home became a boarding house after they left and burned down 10 years after they had gone. Okay. The Lithograph Composite was commissioned in 1900 by Adolphe Brun to distribute in the East, to advertise Brun Chaix wines, and to increase sales. For some reason, the Brun Chaix families didn't have one or possibly even know about the existence of this until the 1960s. And we're told that there are only 3 prints, one at the Bancroft Library, one at a winery here in the valley, but no one had any idea what happened to the other one or if there even were any more than that. In the small world category again, I went to a PTA meeting in San Mateo at the home of a friend, and I walked in, and there was the print, facing right at me, it was hanging over the mantle. Needless to say, I stopped cold. Paul collected prints and had purchased this one because he liked it. He had no idea that it was connected to anybody he knew. The next year, I went back for another luncheon, PTA luncheon, and the picture was gone. And I just stood there frozen. Come to find out, Paul had sent it back to England to be repaired. And he had agreed that if he decided to sell it, he would let us know first. It turns out that, true to his word, a year or so later, Paul called Doug at the office and offered the lithograph, and needless to say, he said yes. We didn't tell anybody, didn't tell my mother for sure, and didn't tell even our kids, until Christmas morning, when the framed picture came out from its hiding place under our bed and was brought downstairs. As you can imagine, 3 generations of the Chaix family descendants were all in tears, and I still have trouble not tearing up at it. This is the first thing we'll grab in an evacuation. There's a small black and white frame over there, but the lower part depicts the Oakville, and then the upper part are the vineyards and the winery on Howell Mountain. Okay. In 1901, Brun Chaix sold both Oakville and Howell Mountain wineries to a new syndicate, the California Wine Association, for $250,000. Which, of course, not today's dollars, yeah, with my grandfather staying on as manager. The Wine Association was formed by a group of investors that included Antoine Borel, a banker and Swiss consul who happened to be the, great-grandfather or great-great, I never know how many greats to put in all these descendants, of 2 brothers that went to high school and school with my husband and me in San Mateo. And it wasn't until just recently that we knew about this, but small world. My grandfather died in 1902, and as the St. Helena Star reported, Jean Chaix passed away August 6, 1902, at the age of 50, at the Oak Mound Sanatorium in Napa of tuberculosis. He had been failing health for many months, complaining of his stomach and liver. He visited Mineral Springs and took medical treatment and was able to attend the extensive business of the wine house of Brun Chaix. He had been on a business trip to the east 4 months before, contracted a severe cold, which rapidly developed into tuberculosis. The funeral at the St. Helena Catholic Church, right right over there, and the pallbearers were J.H. Steve's Hardware, Jacob Schramm, Vintner on Diamond Mountain, Schwabsburg, Jacob Behringer, Vintner, Charles Carpy, Vintner, who purchased Greystone Winery from William Bourne, Thomas Williams, and Arnaud, whose last name I cannot pronounce. I'm not even going to try. I'll show it to you later. Burial followed in the family vault in Holy Cross in Colma. You notice the names on the vault? Mm-hmm. My grandmother's family was Saint-Cyprien. The Saint-Cyprien Winery on Highway 29 was named after my grandmother's brother Edward, who lived at the house from 1904 to 1920 before he moved to San Francisco to live near his sister. And it's a tangible reminder every day of our family here in Napa. Going through the house with Emma Swain, the CEO of Saint-Cyprien Winery, then sitting on the porch where my grandmother Shirley sat with her brother, was another reminder of where the family was and where we're still here. The widows Adolphe Chaix and Napa Brun and their total of 15 children moved back to San Francisco after the death of their husbands and father and remained close friends. I found a note that Emma had written my grandmother and that showed the closeness between the two. It was in French, so I did have to translate it, but I got the gist. John Brun's grandson, Bill Hewitt, a name you might have heard, was president of John Deere Company, known for its tractors, and was a former U.S. ambassador to Jamaica, then retired to Rutherford, where he built a great home designed by architect Kevin Roche. He planted vineyards that had produced the Hewitt wine, which were sold under the umbrella of the Provenance wineries. And those are the heaviest bottles I've ever seen in my life. I don't know anyway, and the wine was good too. Thanks to my husband reading a copy of Appalachian magazine and finding an article on Bill Hewitt and his home, I was able to connect with Bill and his sister and brother. And I loved hearing the stories that they told about playing billiards in the Chaix home on Bush Street in San Francisco. And Bill published a book on the Brun family and introduced the Chaix family connection. He gave me a copy that I have used to verify information, and he also gave a copy to the Historical Society. And I really recommend if you're there that I know that Miriam would be glad to show it to you because it's beautifully done and has pictures, including my family picture. Okay, so now we're on to Adrien Pierre Chaix, or I think it's Chaix, but Chaix tonight. Adrien followed his older brother, John, to Napa Valley in 1881 at the age of 19. He, too, was a viticulturist and a winemaker. 3 years later, he bought property in Rutherford, where he built a home and founded the French-American Wine Company with vineyards and wineries in Rutherford, Healdsburg, and Cloverdale. There it is. And some books I looked at attributed this being to Jean Chaix, but no, it was Adrien. This is a story all its own and should be told by Adrien's family. Suffice it to say, the French-American Wine Company took a hit in the 1906 earthquake, but continued to grow until Prohibition ended its life. Adrien passed away in 1934 at 74 and was buried in St. Helena Cemetery. He and Adolphe Brun were the subject of the St. Helena Historical Society's cemetery tours a couple years ago. Okay. Adrien and his wife Constance had 2 sons, Emile and Edmond, and some of their families are still in the valley. Chaix Lane is named after Adrian and/or Edmund, although I am not above pointing out the fact that my grandfather was also a Chaix. Edmund lived in Rutherford home his entire life and became a vineyard supervisor and served as a volunteer fire chief in Rutherford for 42 years before he passed away in 2017. Two of AP's great-grandchildren, Kathy and Jean Chaix, now produce wines with the Chaix name and have the Rutherford home for the winery. It happens to be across the street from Highway 29 from Saint-Cyprien Winery. Again, very close. By the way, that wine is good too. In assembling and assorting the information of this talk, I found that Jean and Adrian's sister, Philomene Elise Chaix Renaud, who also left France and landed in Salinas, where she and her husband owned a bakery next door to the Steinbeck family. John Steinbeck mentions her wonderful cooking several times in East of Eden. Not necessarily relevant, but it was interesting, and now I've got to go read East of Eden, or reread. Now to bring us to 2022, today, 148 years after the Chaix story began in Napa Valley. The Brun and Chaix Howell Mountain Winery is still functioning today after having changed hands several times since it was built in 1886. Prohibition shut it down, but not forever. 1936 to 1941, Italian Giovanni Tripoli and his son Battista operated the winery under the name of Tripoli and Son. And here's another small world. Their granddaughter Laura is a good friend of our daughter Laura, and the two were showing each other pictures of their grandparents' wineries, and I realized it was the one in the same big building. And Tripoli family Laura told me that during Prohibition, they'd poke holes on the floor, and then when the Prohibitionists came and hacked away the barrels, the wine would go down below into tanks, and they had it. They could keep the wine. So it's a necessity. Necessity is the mother of invention, and waste not, want not. In 1944, Colton Wines bought it and changed the name to Old Mission Wines, but sold it a year later. In 1945, it was sold, but no record of who bought it. 1946 to 49, L.F. Noonan bought it and operated Noonan Winery. In 1973, Hal Cox and Dr. Walter Dawson bought it from L.F. Noonan Winery, and somewhere in between that and 1980, John Hasso had it. But then in 1980, it came under French ownership again, with Francis and Francois de Reverand bought the estate named it Chateau Waltner after Francois' family in France. They restored the winery, and the first vintage was 1985, getting my centuries mixed up, and grew primarily Chardonnay grapes. We found out about the revival when we were having dinner at the then new All Seasons Bistro in Calistoga, and I wanted a glass of Chardonnay. Doug saw the label and promptly ordered the whole bottle without even tasting it. He knew exactly which winery it was. Thanks to Dennis Johns, who we've known since we were coming up here so often, who knew, I connected with Francis, and he showed us the winery, and I don't think to this day he believes I'm just the granddaughter. I don't know what, of Jean Chaix. Francis was also a friend of Guy Buffet, one of my favorite painters, and who made this poster, which we had framed. In 2000, Pat and Ann Stotesbury purchased the winery, named it Ladera, meaning hillside or slope, and made several changes and improvements, replacing the Chardonnay grapes with red Bordeaux grape varietals, building a cave that was in the mountain where wines age, and the guests could partake in tastings in a special room with a long table made from wood from the original winery. Yeah, there it is. And what you see, they opened up the top, put a windows, the Stotesbury's opened up, put the windows up on the top and opened it up, and it was charming and just beautifully done. And they put a lot of thought and care into that, and they were very gracious to allow us to be there all the time and sort of claim part ownership, which we had which we didn't have. But the Stotesburys graciously offered us some wood from the original winery, and we had Michael Johnson make us some tables. And then he made the branding iron over there, and these are heavy tables. Believe me, you're not going to just walk away out the door with them. And then in 2016, the Cade conglomerate acquired the winery and most of the property, but not the Ladera name. But that wood is just gorgeous. Okay. In her book, Old Napa Valley, The History to 1900, Lynn Weber's final paragraph says it all. Most folks came for the visit, some came for the summer. A few left their past behind them and moved in for good. My husband and I did just that. We had been coming up here for years. As soon as we got to Yountville, Doug always said I was a totally different person. I was relaxed, and I knew I was coming home, that place that it called home. 7 years ago, we followed Jean Chaix's example, and we moved to Napa Valley for good, leaving our past behind us and embracing the Chaix family past and present here. And we know we made the right decision. We feel it all the time. A point of clarification, just so that you're wondering about the grandchildren and great-grandchildren. My grandmother was, I am the granddaughter because my grandmother was 38 when my mother was born. My mother was 39 when I was born. So there's an extra generation in there that most families would have that we don't have. I might add that our last child, I was 40, so it runs in the family. And I think our daughter was 41 when her last was. Okay, all right. All the cousins that are my age are my second cousins. And today, out of the clear blue sky, a letter came in the mail, forwarded from St. Helena, and it was from my cousin who lives in Cleveland. And I couldn't find her. I mean, I had gotten a letter, I saw them, I think, 2006, and we went up to Hall Mountain. And all of a sudden, she dropped off the face of the earth. I couldn't find her at all. She sent a letter today, and I talked to her. And she confirmed that, yes, it was Chaix. But anyway, why that afternoon, I have no idea. But the one thing, anyway. And I did find out in my research that the Napa Wine Company has gotten the copyright, trademark, I'm not sure which word it is, for Brun and Chaix. And I don't know what they're going to do with it. So if any of you hear anything about it, I'd like to know. I called them, and they didn't know, and so I haven't found out. Okay, the things I have learned putting this together. Death certificates almost always have mistakes of some kind. Spelling, dates, names, locations, whatever. And some books on history in Napa Valley have mistaken information, such as dates, names, or facts, that will never be rectified. My advice is always use the Historical Society, because thanks to Miriam and their records, they've got it all right. And I thank her for a lot of what she had shared. And it is an extremely small world. And information comes from unlikely sources. But, they say there's 6 degrees of separation. It's probably 1.5. But anyway, I want to thank my cousins who weren't able to be here tonight. Kathy Chaix, Lynn Chaix Albrecht, who works at the library. So it's fun to go to the library and find a cousin. And Rosalind Renault Jacobs, who had contacted Kathy, and we all exchanging information about the sister of Adrian and Jean. And especially Miriam and Kathleen for all your help and your patience for me constantly. Yeah, I just changed this, here's this, and so how they, thank you. And most especially, I thank my husband for his support, encouragement, and patience when I was putting all this together. Now he can finally, now I have no excuse not to do something. And I thank you all for allowing me to share my family ties with you all and for having you here. Thank you. Thank you.
Are there any questions for Lois?
When I was thinking, well, I wonder if they ask any questions. The hardest thing about doing this whole thing was to figure out what to wear tonight. This is about the third choice I made. Anyway, but thank you all for coming. I really appreciate it. And there's a couple things that are just kind of fun to see. Yes?
Edmund was a friend of my husband's family, and we always said Chaix.
Right.
Is that the?
Well, no, it depends upon who in the family. My grandfather, Jean Chaix, and that's all we ever knew. And and my cousin who just called today said, well, what about the Chaix family? I said, ha, thank you. That's exactly what. But, you know, Kathy and John say Chaix. And then Ed's family, no, Chaix. 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 See, well, because that's on their publicity for their wine. They spell it C-H-E, however, Chaix, whatever. And then the other one, Chaix. Chaix, is that what you said? Yeah. So that's why I mentioned the two ways of saying it. And the other day I was talking to somebody, and they said, oh, you mean Chaix? And I said, no. Chaix. So it depends upon who in the family you talk to as to how you pronounce it. Yeah.
Lois, I have two questions. How long did you work on this? And also, is there anyone else in your family that has kept genealogy, or did you do all of this work on your own?
Most of this I did myself. I started, when did I start? It seems like forever. But I've been buying books, every time I go in the library or the bookstore, I buy one of the books. If I see Brun and Chaix or Brun or somebody in the thing, I grab get a copy. I have several copies of one or two of publications because I bought the same one because I didn't, okay. So I've been going through all of that. Miriam's information has been wonderful. She has a lot of it, so I cross-referenced a lot of it. Bill Hewitt's book also gave a lot to it. And yes, I have a cousin doing lineage, but it's on my father's side. And she called the other day, and I said, I can't talk to you about that side of the family until after the 14th of September. I can't mix my families up. But my cousin on that side had done a lot. But with this, and most of it, a lot of it's repetitive, and then I had to weed out a lot of what was there. And as I say, correct some of it that wasn't there, but it was a labor of love. Yes, Mary?
The library owns a copy of Bill Hewitt's book on Brun and Chaix.
Oh, they do?
So if you go in and ask for Lynn, Lynn Chaix Albert, and she'll show you what it is.
Good, okay. I didn't realize, I know you have one here, but good, then you can meet Lynn, my cousin. It's more fun having a cousin in town that I didn't know I had.
Anyone else?
Mary?
I have a question. Of the wines that were made, are any of the old vintages or the bottles still in existence? Have you ever come across any?
In fact, my cousin that called today, his brother, had a label from something, but not that I know of. If they are, I have no idea where. But as I say, all my cousins, they are my second cousins, so it would have been their parents probably, and the one that called me today is the granddaughter of Uncle John, who was the second oldest in the family. So, there's a long span in there. But I was lucky enough to know. Yeah, Ann?
I think
one of the most, I mean, this has all been interesting, but the detail you shared about the pallbearers, it was just fascinating.
Isn't that-
That's such a snapshot of who was in the community at that moment. But I was wondering if, you know, you shared so much from different sources. Was there one source that for you was, you know, kind of a bigger aha moment, or you've had so many small world experiences too?
I know, it all sort of fell into place. But I have a lot, my mother kept newspaper articles. These articles I have here were direct, and I couldn't quite make a copy of them because they'd probably just dissolve on the copy machine. But a lot of them there, some of the things, the information like the papers and even their marriage certificates a lot of them were in French, but I have all those. And a lot of it, I think my mother she labeled the book, the photo album, which is wonderful, and back to the Saint-Cyprien original parents who were in France. Were they in France? No, they were in, most of them were ended up in San Francisco. But a lot of that, and I say some of them were in French, and some of them I could translate, some of them I had no idea because the writing was so beautiful, I didn't know what they were writing. But, yeah.
Oh, it just made me think of, you said the Tour de France goes through the town that you're.
Well, at least that area, yeah.
That area, but your comment about always wanting to look on the TV means that you have not been there before?
No.
So, maybe that's.
No, well, we've been in France, but not down in that area, and I would love to. I would just very much like to. But so I get all my information, my looks, and I would now. I'm not going to bicycle around that area, though. I'll tell you, but it's beautiful, and I would like to. And as I say, I did not. I took 2 years of high school French and 2 years of college French. I am intimidated. My uncle John came and was at the table and said, "Passez le pain." And I said, "What?" And like, "Huh?" And I understand, in fact, Linder's daughter told me that she was with someone who had a French family, and she was intimidated to speak French. And I can bumble my way through if we're in France, but I can't fluently do it. And it's my problem and my stupidity of not having really forced it. So my next door neighbor lived in France, or our new next door neighbor lived in France for summer or something. So she's offered, so maybe I'll get her to bring her some wine. I'll go walk over next with a bottle of wine and we'll speak French. Well, I thank you so much for coming. Thank you.